Democratic candidates are getting very personal on the campaign trail as they push to preserve Obamacare, frankly sharing tales of their own health struggles. In a House district in Illinois, registered nurse Lauren Underwood talks about a heart condition that would put her at risk for losing her health coverage if Congress or federal courts strike down the Affordable Care Act and its protections for people with pre-existing conditions. In California's Central Valley, T.J. Cox tells voters that before Obamacare, his insurance refused to cover his wife's C-section because it considered her pregnancy a pre-existing condition. And in suburban Detroit, Elissa Slotkin's brutal television ads includes footage of her mother as a dying cancer patient who for years had been denied insurance. Similar messages are coming from 3 Democratic senators running for re-election in states that President Donald Trump carried in 2016, Tammy Baldwin of Wisconsin, who had a childhood illness, and Missouri's Claire McCaskill and North Dakota's Heidi Heitkamp, both of whom have had breast cancer. For a dozen or so Democrats, most of them women, talking about their own cancer, heart disease or harrowing illness of a child or spouse is a way to forge a connection with voters and show they're in the health care policy fight for the long haul. If you haven't personally gone through a scare, health policy may be more theoretical to you. But it's not to me, said Arkansas State Representative Clark Tucker, who decided to challenge Representative French Hill, Republican Arkansas, after being diagnosed with bladder cancer in 2017 when he was just 36. I hear from the so many people who have had similar experiences, whether cancer or something else, Tucker told Politico. They say it's meaningful for them to know that someone who wants to represent them has been through what they've been through. Candidates are sending this message in ads, on social media and in face-to-face encounters, and polls show the issue strongly resonates with voters. Public concern about pre-existing conditions was part of why the GOP failed to repeal Obamacare last year. And an anti-Obamacare lawsuit by conservative states, with Trump administration support, threatens the health law's popular patient protections all over again, right before the elections. A ruling could come any day in that case. No longer playing defense on health, Democrats and allied groups aired nearly 56,000 TV ads focused on healthcare between January and July. The Wesleyan Media Project found that in September, healthcare ads dominated 44% of ads supporting Democratic House candidates and 50% of those supporting Democrats in Senate races. And in several competitive high-profile races, Democratic candidates are adding personal narratives. Meanwhile, Republican candidates and allied groups have focused most of their TV ads on their support for Trump or tax cuts, according to Wesleyan. In August, for instance, fewer than 1 in 4 of the pro-GOP ads mentioned health care at all, and only 1% touched on Obamacare. Instead of repeating the repeal pledges that had been a GOP staple for years, candidates have largely focused on messaging that a Democratic-controlled House would bring a single-payer, one-size-fits-all government health care. A few Republicans are recounting personal health stories, most use it as a prism to demonstrate personal grit. That's particularly true for those, like Representative Brian Mast, Republican Florida, and GOP candidates Steve Watkins in Kansas and Dan Crenshaw in Texas, who sustained serious injuries serving in the military. For some Democrats, talking about their own health issues isn't a new campaign message, but one that regains salience with each new threat to the ACA. Baldwin, for example, had a childhood illness that made it impossible for her to buy insurance at any price from age 9 until her college years, a major financial strain on the grandparents who raised her. She said she brings up the experience at almost every campaign stop. So many parents and grandparents have those worries constantly, and that's really what I hear when I tell my story, she said. I've been telling this story since I first ran for local office in the 1980s. And, sadly, I have to keep telling it all these years later, because coverage for pre-existing conditions is still very much under threat. McCaskill, who is in a tough race against a state attorney general who is part of the latest anti-Obamacare lawsuit, similarly says the GOP repeal threats have motivated her to share her story. 2 years ago, I beat breast cancer, she says in recent TV ad. Like thousands of other women in Missouri, I don't talk about it much. But those who face cancer and many other illnesses have a pre-existing condition when it comes to health coverage. In swing districts scattered along both coasts, the Midwest Heartland and the Rust Belt, House candidates are also injecting their personal stories, in some cases explaining how that motivated them to challenge a Republican incumbent who voted for Obamacare repeal last year. In the Chicago area district where Underwood is running, Democrats see a solid opportunity to unseat Republican Randy Hultgren. IL 14 with a pre-existing heart condition, says a recent tweet from Underwood, who's both a nurse and a former Health and Human Services official. In 2017, Randy Hultgren told his constituents that he'd vote to protect health care for folks with pre-existing conditions. He voted to do the opposite. Now, I'm running to unseat him. In Michigan, Slotkin's ads take an especially personal tone. One spot cuts from footage of Slotkin's cancer-stricken mother, giving a toast at the wedding the candidate rushed to hold before her mother's death, to a video of House Republicans celebrating in the Rose Garden after passing their Obamacare repeal bill, which later died in the Senate. Slotkin's race in Michigan's 8th district against Republican Mike Bishop shifted over summer from a likely Republican win to what political handicappers now see as a toss-up. The 13th House district in Illinois is one of the few races where the two parties' approaches to health collide. Democrat Betsy Dirksen-Londrigan, challenging Representative Rodney Davis in the GOP-leading district, recently ran an ad that describes how she nearly lost her son to a tick-borne disease when he was 12 years old, and how her family would have been financially ruined without comprehensive insurance. And voters, she said, respond. As I share my story you almost see the walls come down, she told Politico. They're thinking about their own health care story or their best friend or someone they know who is struggling. It cuts across party lines and every line there is. Davis hit right back. He released an ad Wednesday in which his wife describes surviving colon cancer and declares, "I am a person with a pre-existing condition, it's personal to us." Shannon Davis was sick long before the health law was passed, and the family was able to afford her care and choose her physician under the insurance they had. Rodney Davis said that watching his constituents' more recent experiences, dealing with high costs and limited choice, has solidified his determination to repeal Obamacare. So many people with pre-existing conditions are being priced out of the market under the ACA, he said. These high premiums and deductibles are not what we were promised. That's not pre-existing condition coverage as I view it, that's unaffordable coverage. My wife was misdiagnosed at first, and told her symptoms were just in her head, he added. Luckily, the health coverage I had allowed me to fire the primary care physician I had and get a better one. The new doctor was Canadian and he told me that if we were in Canada, my wife wouldn't have been diagnosed until she was at stage 4. But because she was diagnosed at stage 2, she got the care she needed and is still cancer-free 19 years later. I don't want anybody to have happened what would have happened in Canada. The emphasis on health and family also fits into broader trends this year with a record-breaking number of Democratic women on the ballot. More Democrats than Republicans are talking about health and more women Democratic candidates are talking about health than their male counterparts, said Wesleyan Media Project co-director Erica Franklin Fowler. This is an issue that resonates with voters and using a personal frame is one way to talk credibly about having expertise on the issue. Underwood, for instance, is touting her expertise not just as a nurse and a heart patient, but also as a former health policy advisor in the Obama administration's HHS during Obamacare's rocky rollout. I don't shy away from talking about my experience implementing the ACA, she told Politico. And I've found that my community has found a lot of value in its critical protections, like getting rid of annual and lifetime limits, allowing children to remain on their parents' plan until age 26, and having access to contraception. So I've talked about it every single day since I started running for office. But Jesse Hunt, the national press secretary of the National Republican Congressional Committee, said Democrats are turning to personal stories to evade the political pitfalls of the left's push for single-payer care. Democrats are using personal stories to avoid uncomfortable conversations about where they want to take our health care, he said. It helps them discuss the issue of health care through a lens that is less problematic. They don't want their actual views known on this policy, that they want a government-controlled single-payer health care system, so they're obfuscating.